Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks so much for joining us. Today we've got a really special guy. His name is Gary Arndt. Glad you're here. You know, whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, Google, there's even actually a radio station that's going to be playing this. So if you're listening from the radio station, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Please do check out previous episodes. Love to have you listen to some of those if you didn't catch it on the broadcast. You can catch it anywhere that podcasts are found and where you get your favorites. So back to Gary Arndt. Gary Arndt is another traveler. I said that we weren't going to just do travelers, and we're not. I think we can learn a lot from Gary, even if you're not a world traveler, which he certainly is. But he's also a photographer. He's had his photography in magazines, various magazines. He also has a blog, and he has a podcast. You know, his blog, his podcast, all of it, it follows the name Everything Everywhere. The blog talks about his travels, hidden places to see, and his podcast is really cool. It's not like this one. Not to say this podcast isn't cool. His podcast is it's like short little history or short little geography things. It's an everyday podcast. He puts it out every day, 7 or 8 minutes long. They're not super long, but it's going to teach you different things about history and things like that. It's a really cool podcast. I recommend checking it out. Without saying too much more, I really enjoyed speaking to Gary Arndt. Really inspiring words, teaching us a lot about travel, podcasting, creating a blog, tips on creating really good photography. Just a really good conversation. And with that, let's pass it over to my interview with Gary Arndt.
Mr. Arndt, thanks so much for joining us. If you would, just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you went from being an entrepreneur in Minnesota to a traveler/photographer that I believe went to over 130 countries.
Well, it kind of starts back in the 90s. I started an internet company that was really kind of early. This is before the first .com boom. I sold that. Started some other companies, went back to school to study geology for a couple of years. I didn't know what to do. So I came up with the idea of traveling around the world, selling my house. And I thought I would travel around the world for a year or two. And it pretty much ended up being a decade. So I just kind of never stopped. And that's pretty much how it started.
And that's really cool. And I've heard that you weren't necessarily always a huge traveler before you decided to make this leap. So I guess what made you just decide, it's time now just to make the leap and start seeing the world?
No, growing up, I wasn't in a family that traveled very much. I never saw saltwater until I was 21 years old. And when I sold my business, I sold it to a large global company. And I convinced them to send me on an around-the-world trip to go to the regional offices to talk about the internet and its potential uses. And so they sent me on a 3-week tour where I went literally around the world. I went to Tokyo, Taipei, Singapore, Frankfurt, Brussels, Paris, and London. And did all that in 3 weeks. It was the first time I'd ever really been anywhere. First time I had been to Asia. First time I'd been to Europe. And it was kind of left me with a pretty lasting, experience. And I really enjoyed it. And it was something I wanted to do more of. And that's kind of, I think, where the idea of traveling around the world was hatched.
Yeah. I mean, I've said to a lot of people, the travel bug is definitely a real thing. Once you experience it, it's definitely something I think most people kind of want more of. So I guess you mentioned that you were sent around, to the different regional offices or I guess world offices. After that, how did you go about your travels? I mean, it was an extended period of time, but so did you really focus on certain areas and then travel by land around those areas? Did you kind of crisscross around with flight deals? I just kind of wonder exactly how you decided where to go and how to make sure that you experienced everything there is to experience in these areas.
I kind of made it up as I went along. When I started, my general idea was to go west. And what I knew, the places I knew I wanted to start was in the Pacific because I'd always been fascinated by these little island countries. So I started in Minneapolis. I rented a car, drove it to Dallas, took a train from Dallas to LA, which was a horrible experience, by the way. Don't do it. Flew from LA to Hawaii, learned how to scuba dive, got my certification. And then I went to Tahiti, Easter Island, Cook Islands, New Zealand, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, all these places in the Pacific. And that took me about 6 months. And I just kind of made it up as I went along. I really didn't have a plan. I wasn't buying an around the world ticket or anything like that. I just sort of went wherever, I felt like at that time. There was one stretch in there where I did have to book my tickets for like a month in advance, just to make it all work. And that was really the only time I did that. Other than that, I just sort of stayed somewhere until I felt like it was time to go.
So on average, how long did you stay at these different areas?
It depends. I ended up staying in Samoa for quite a while, simply because I actually got sick while I was there. I got like a skin infection, and I ended up going to American Samoa, which is really close by. I stayed there and ended up staying in a hotel room for like a week, just as I was recovering. I only went into town once. Some places I may have just stayed for like 4 days. Others, I stayed a little bit longer. When I got back to Honolulu, after going around the South Pacific, I ended up staying there for 2 weeks just to kind of rest and, go through my photos and stuff like that before heading out again, going to like the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Palau. And then from there, I went to the Philippines and then worked my way up to South Korea and then down to Hong Kong.
So I read that you didn't have a permanent residence for like 12 years. What made you decide to be voluntarily homeless, as someone else put it?
It's just easier. A lot of people, they think traveling is expensive, and it can be. But if you just go and you live on the road, you forego rent/mortgage, all your utilities, the cost of a car, which includes fuel, insurance, and other upkeep, and all just the other stuff, all the money you spend, you're not spending a lot of that. And moreover, in a lot of the places you can travel, you can go to places that are very affordable, where you're going to be spending a fraction of the amount of money for food and accommodations than you would if you were staying at home. So yeah, it really just, made a lot of sense. And I think if you're going to travel for, over a year, then you can, I know people who have certainly not sold their house, but it was a good transition for me. And it's something actually I recommend doing if you're going to move or you're transitioning careers or you're getting out of school or there's some change in your life like that. That's always a good time to go travel.
If I read it correctly, you do have a residence now. Is that right?
Well, I did as of a few weeks ago. So I lived in Minneapolis for the last 5 years, and my neighborhood was right kind of where a lot of the rioting and a lot of the destruction happened. We had fires right outside of my building, and a gas station like 100 yards from me burned to the ground, and pretty much everything is boarded up or destroyed, and nothing changed in 2 months. So I eventually just put all my stuff in a U-Haul a couple of weeks ago and left.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, being right in Minneapolis. That wasn't something I even thought about. I mean, even down here in Indianapolis, Indiana, I mean, most of our downtown was boarded up because of, some of the social unrest. So I can't even imagine that. So from one really deep and topic to another, how is, the COVID pandemic affecting your travels currently?
It's completely stopped. And it's pretty much that way for everyone I know, the entire travel industry. And I should add that the travel and tourism industry, a lot of people don't know this, is one of, if not the biggest industry in the world. It is on a par with things like agriculture and energy. I mean, it's really that big. And it's gone to nothing. So my income basically just evaporated. I think it dropped by somewhere around 95 to 98%. in the span of like 30 days, because it was both on the industry side, you had companies and tourism boards that just stopped spending money because they were in survival mode. And then on the other side, on the consumer side, people stopped buying, people stopped researching trips. So, traffic to my website and everything else just vanished. And it's been that way for pretty much everybody. I know, tour companies that were making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and they went down to zero revenue, absolute zero. So it's been devastating. I mean, even hotels, they could maybe get a few people that were coming in. They had to go for work, or, even if they were hospital employees or something. But for a lot of the tour companies and some people in the travel business, it's just been devastating.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people that do travel, and they're trying to find ways just to do domestic travel, but it's not necessarily as easy or as profitable as what they were doing in the past. But yeah, my heart definitely goes out for. There's a lot of countries, just like you were mentioning, that without tourism's a huge part of their GDP. Without tourism, that they're really, really, really struggling.
Yeah, all the countries I just mentioned in the Pacific, for example, they've done a very good job of keeping out the virus, which is easy to do when you're in the middle of nowhere in an island. The problem is it's really just devastated their economies. And so they're kind of in a holding pattern, just waiting for things to get better. I know some places like Fiji were thinking of opening up just to Australia or just to New Zealand or something like that. But that's all I've heard so far.
So what do you think that this is, a short-term thing? Do you think it's a long-term thing, or maybe even a permanent differences in travel because of COVID?
There are some changes that are going to be permanent. And I think that those primarily are going to deal with business travel. A lot of people, things like Zoom have always existed. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but no one ever used it. If you had said a year ago that the nightly news or all the late night talk shows would be hosted from someone's house, you'd have been laughed out of the room, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then all of a sudden that became the norm. That's just how everything on TV is being done, like it's a YouTube channel. And I think there's a lot of companies that are realizing that they are saving a ton of money by not having all the office and real estate. It's just something you did as a business. You just had to have an office. Mm-hmm. I know one company in New York, their lease came up and they just didn't renew it. And now everyone works from home, and that's their company, and they're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And the same is going to apply to business meetings, I think. Then unless it's absolutely necessary, you can get it done for a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost by just doing a video conference. And I think you're going to see more people doing that. So that's going to dramatically impact business travel. As far as leisure travel, that is primarily going to be people, how people are going to respond. I have a pretty active Facebook group of, with very well-traveled people. And I took a poll last week, and it's all over the map. I'd say a third of the people absolutely are not going to go anywhere until this is dead in the ground and there's a vaccine and everything else. A third of the people were like, oh, they'll wait and see. And then a third are like, yeah, I'll go right now. And this is the well-traveled group. So for everyone else, I don't know. But I think you're not going to have any sense of normalcy until well into next year at the earliest. Because I think people they're going to be pretty safe and take precautions rather than take a chance.
So for people who want to kind of, I guess, forget that we can't travel right now and kind of live through some of your experiences, if you would, tell us a little bit more about your Everything Everywhere blog and what we can learn from that.
Well, I started the website before I started traveling, and it just documents. And, when I started it, it was really sort of social media at the time, because Twitter wasn't a thing. I mean, Facebook and Twitter existed, but they weren't a big deal. So people would actually come to your website, and I would just, tell people what I did that day and what my thoughts of things were. And things have changed over time. So now the website, it's a kind of a repository for information for visiting a lot of the places I go to, especially like national parks and World Heritage sites. And I also just launched a podcast a couple of months ago. It's not a travel podcast. It is kind of a history podcast, but it deals a lot with like stories and things I've learned traveling. So it's a daily show, but it covers a wide range of topics dealing with geography, history, science, space, all sorts of stuff. And a lot of it's just based on things I learned from different people and from different places around the world.
Yeah, and I've listened to some of your podcasts. How do you come up with, I guess, all of those different the ideas? Does it take a lot of research, or these things that you already have, just stored up there? I know you were talking very recently about currency and how different countries use the dollar. It's there's a lot of popes. You talked about how we got popes. So I just wonder how you come up with ideas every single day with that.
I don't know. There are literally days where I don't know what I'm going to record, and then I just think of something. So I have a whole bunch of I have this thing on my computer where every time I get an idea, I just put it down. So I had like 150 different show ideas. Some of them I realized I cannot make full shows out of. They're just too small. So like today, I just wrote up an episode that's like just a potpourri episode of a bunch of little things that couldn't make up their own. And I realized they all had a theme. It was like survival. One was the only person in history that we know of who got hit by a meteorite and she lived. One was about these people who were on like 5 different ships that sunk and they survived every time. One guy was on 3 ships in 1 hour that sunk in World War I. Because he was on a ship that sunk, then he swam to another ship that got sunk, then he swam to another ship that got sunk. And then one was about a doctor who had to perform surgery on herself at the South Pole because she had cancer. And there was no one else there to do it. So she literally had to perform a surgery on herself.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, but I mean, I didn't think any of these could be a full episode. And then the other one I'm going to probably record after we're done talking was about fire and how humans discovered fire. Because if you think about the one thing that, probably started us on the road to being humans, it was figuring out fire. And what do we know about that? When did humans first start to use fire, and what did we use it for? And I've read a lot of stuff on this in the past, so it's just a matter of kind of putting it all together into a short. And I should mention it's a daily show, so the shows are about 10 minutes long, and putting into something that's kind of digestible and interesting in that period of time.
Yeah, and they certainly are interesting. I've enjoyed all the ones that I've listened to, so I thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so and I want to read this because I don't want to get any of these stats wrong, because you definitely have some amazing stats when it comes to your travels. 198 countries or territories, all 50 states, 380 or more UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So that's really, really cool. I know you don't pick favorites. I've listened to you, talk to other people, and you don't pick favorites. I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't want you to do that. But are there any places that you've been that you can say everyone should see? You shouldn't miss these sites?
Oh, there's so many. Actually, I think that those numbers are a little out of date. I've been to 204 countries and territories now, using the Traveler Century Club list, and they have 326 different distinct places around the world. That includes places like Puerto Rico, Antarctica, stuff like that may not be a country per se, but it's its own thing. And I've been to every state twice now. The place I always mention, there's some great places. One is South Georgia Island, which most people have never heard of. It is above Antarctica, between South America and Africa. It's where Ernest Shackleton rescued his men. Absolutely fantastic place. I tell people, if you ever want to go to Antarctica, make sure you're on a boat that stops in South Georgia Island, because that's really the highlight of the trip, not Antarctica. Because you get off the boat and you see 250,000 penguins on the beach, and they have no fear of humans, and it's an incredible experience. Another great place that I always try to talk about is Nahanni National Park, and it's maybe the greatest national park in the world, and almost no one has heard of it because it's in the Northwest Territories of Canada, and there are no roads connecting the park to the rest of the world. You have to fly in. And so it gets 800 visitors a year, even though it is one of, I think, the greatest attractions on earth. I mean, most Canadians have never even heard of it, but it's really that exceptional. And, I've been talking about it in interviews for years now. I don't think a single person has actually ever gone there.
No, those are really good insights. I hope that you were going to give us some places that people haven't traveled to a lot. So that's really cool. And those are things that I've written down. So I guess conversely, and maybe you can mention places that are over traveled, but are there any places that you may not go back to, or that you'll leave for somebody else to go to at this point?
I'll go back pretty much anywhere. There are some places I'm not in a rush that, unless it was some special circumstance, I probably wouldn't go out of my way to visit. And those tend to be like, Cancun, the real touristy kind of places. But I think there are a lot of places that do get a lot of tourists that have some amazing things that most people don't know about. Yeah. So for example, Rome. There's so much in Rome that the average tourist has no clue that it's there. And it gets, everyone goes to the Forum and they see the Colosseum and they go to the Vatican. But, even in the Vatican, there are tours you can take through the Vatican Gardens, which very few people get to see. There's a tour you can take of the catacombs that are below St. Peter's. It was the original Roman cemetery that it was built on. Nero's palace was discovered after World War II, or at least parts of it. And you can go in and see the original artwork, the painting that was preserved because it was buried. And, you can see all the colors and stuff they used. Just outside of Rome, there are two fantastic places. One is Ostia Antica, which used to be the port city for Rome. And again, almost no one goes there. And the other is up in the city of Tivoli, which is about 45 minutes away up in the hills. And you can see the palace of the Emperor Hadrian. And they still have statues and all the stuff that's still there, the swimming pool there. And, I was basically by myself when I was there. And there's a lot of really neat things like that all over the world that even if you go to a major city, there's really cool stuff you can see that most people don't know about.
Let's kind of shift gears a little bit. I know that you have a huge collection of National Geographic magazines, and you were named National Geographic Travel of the Year finalist several times. So did you make it into your own magazine collection?
Not really. I've never worked for National Geographic. I started collecting the National Geographics like 20 years ago after I sold my business, and they were surprisingly cheap to buy because most people just never throw them away. And so they end up, like their dad had them and he passed away and they don't know what to do with them and they don't want to throw them away. So I would take them off their hands. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up getting a collection that was, well, at the time before I started traveling, was complete up until I think around the year 1916. And then I had a bunch that were even from before that, including one of the only copies of issue 1, number 1, one of the originals, not a reprint. So yeah, but I know some people at National Geographic, but I've never actually done any work with them.
Gotcha. Now you are a photographer. We mentioned that. I believe I've read that you're self-taught. So what got you into photography and travel photography?
Well, when you go on a trip, you bring a camera. And like a lot of people, I bought a camera at the start of my travels that was very expensive, thinking it would take better pictures. And I learned out quickly that that's not how it works, because I was taking a lot of really bad photos. Yeah. And I at least had enough self-awareness to recognize that the photos were bad. So I just began a process of trying to incrementally get better. And it seems to have worked. I've won pretty much every major travel photography award there is to win in North America, at least. People seem to like it. So
yeah, I definitely think you've gotten better if they started out bad. So what advice, basic advice do you give to people who want to be just a little bit better with the camera that they've spent so much money on?
Learn what all the knobs and dials are for. They're there for a reason. And a lot of people, most people, just put it on automatic and then they don't do anything, which really defeats the purpose of buying a nice camera. Mm-hmm. I always recommend people should shoot in aperture priority mode. That means you set the aperture, which is the hole that the light comes through, the size, and then let the camera figure out the shutter speed. And then just look to see if it's too dark or too light, and then just adjust. There's usually a plus minus button on the back of the camera. Then you can just adjust that up or down to get the proper exposure. And that's the simplest and easiest thing to do as far as controlling your camera. And then beyond that, it's just a lot of practice, figuring out composition and light and learning what you did well and trying to do that more often, and learn what you did bad and then avoid that. Some of my best shots were just sort of by accident. or something happened and I happened to be at the right place at the right time, and I got the photo. One of my favorite photos was taken in Ethiopia when a Coptic priest was leaving this church because he got a cell phone call, and he was in his traditional robes, and he had his prayer book, and he also had a cell phone, and he walked right past me, and I just turned around, took his photo at a profile, and it's one of my favorite photos. And I have another one of a woman standing in front of a waterfall on the island of Dominica in the Caribbean. I have no idea who she was. She just got up and posed perfectly, put her arms out in front of the waterfall and then sat down. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I think those pictures of seeing life as they're happening, and that's really, really cool. That kind of leads me to one of my final questions. I looked at your website. I found a lot of articles about a lot of really, really cool experiences you've had. It's almost impossible for me to pick just a few of them to ask you about. So I'd hope that you'd help me out just a little bit by kind of just one or two of your favorite experiences that you've had in all these years of traveling.
Favorite experience might be landing, staying overnight, and being launched from a nuclear aircraft carrier.
I saw that one.
Yeah, several years ago, I was invited by the Navy. They have a program where they invite VIPs and journalists to visit an aircraft carrier. So the Navy has a program where they invite VIPs and journalists. And so I said, hell yeah, I'm going to do it. So I drove down to Norfolk, Virginia, and we flew. They have a small cargo plane that's used for aircraft carriers that can do carrier landings. I believe it's called an A2 Greyhound. So me and I think it was 6 other people flew in. We did a landing on the aircraft carrier. We got the tour. We stayed overnight, got to meet the crew, did a tour of the ship, got to see how it all works, even got to go out on the flight deck while they were doing takeoffs and landings. And incredible experience. And the next day we got launched from the ship. And that was quite the thing. I almost passed out.
Yeah,
it's the most acceleration you'll ever experience.
So just a few last questions to wrap it up. You mentioned that you weren't a huge traveler before this whole journey started. I'm sure there's people listening that haven't traveled much and that just haven't taken that step, even whether it's just going beyond their typical week-long vacation to Florida every year. So what advice do you give to people who want to take that leap and do a little bit more traveling, or to be a little bit more adventurous in their traveling?
You just got to do it. Everyone can think up reasons as to why they shouldn't do it. Oh, it's too expensive. Oh, I can't take that much time off from work. There's lots of reasons.
Absolutely.
But the people that travel a lot simply find ways to make it work and make it a priority in their life. You don't need to stay at luxury hotels. In fact, it's probably better if you don't, because you'll save money, which allows you to travel more rather than blowing it all, spending, $200 plus a night. You can find something for a fraction of the price, and you'll meet more interesting people that way. Yeah, it's just something you got to do. Find an opportunity even if it takes several years to plan, you can probably make it happen.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. So how you've mentioned this podcast, you've mentioned your blog. I'm not sure what else maybe that you've got going on in the works. If you would, just to wrap it up, tell us a little bit how we can find that podcast, how we can find your blog, and any other things that you want to mention.
Well, the blog and the podcast are called Everything Everywhere. Just search for that. It should be very easy to find, or just search for my name. You can just search for Gary and Travel, and you'll find me. I'm super easy to find online.
Well, that's an important thing when it comes to online, isn't it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for spending a little bit of your evening with me. And you've been really helpful, I think. And I kind of have lived vicariously through you, and it's really an honor to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Take care, Gary.
And that was my interview with Gary Arndt. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope to see you next time. It was a real pleasure to interview him, and it's a real pleasure just to have you as a listener. So thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next time. And Chris, take us out.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time, where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.